Y vamos a ir con la ponencia Ecofisiología del árbol frutal, el crecimiento y el uso diario de agua. Esta ponencia está a cargo del académico de la Universidad de Bolonia, Italia, doctor en Ciencias Agrícolas con maestría en Ciencias en Horticultura, Universidad de Clemson, Carolina del Sur. Le damos la bienvenida al doctor Luca Corelli Grapadelli.
E a Richard Bastias, che per ora è stato l'ultimo, avendo fatto il dottorato con me, ma ormai quasi sono passati 10 anni dalla fine di quel dottorato. I switch now to English to say thanks to the organizers and in particular to Greg Lang for inviting me to share a few of my ideas in this seminario and in this lecture. I will now start my presentation and we'll put it on full screen. So this is my title, and it spurs from a discussion that I had with Greg Lang, who asked me to not really necessarily focus on sweet cherry, although the seminario is about this crop, but kind of take a done in my laboratory over many years, shown us and how we can see now ways for ecophysiology to work in everyday management of orchards. In particular, regarding the implications between ecofeed and fruit growth and daily work. Light environment had on the capacity of leaves to support fruit growth. So the theme of fruit growth and which leaves were able to support it, and how the light environment impacted these relationships. So up here, I am showing a layout, the composition of shoot components, leaves, shoots, fruits, from a radio tracer study I conducted at Cornell 36 or 37 years ago. This part of the shoot had been labeled with radioactive carbon, and then X-ray film was placed in contact with the layout, and after a few weeks I went ahead and developed a film that allowed us to see where the radioactivity had moved from the sources, and so it was one of the possible approaches we had then to pinpoint these movements within the shoot components. And as we can see, for the fully exposed shoot, which is the above row, there was some export to a fruit, which happened to be this one, which was hanging off a spur outside the exposed part of the shoot. Certainly, not a lot of carbon had moved out of the fruit, but some did. This was 3 weeks after full bloom. When we shaded our shoots with a fairly heavy 65% shading cloth, there was no export whatsoever from the pulsed leaves to indicate that light had a strong effect on how early does export from sources to sinks happen. discoveries like these led to the definition of leaf demography. That is to say that there are different families of leaves within the canopy of a tree, and not all of these leaves families have the same importance to support fruit growth. This is work by the late Jens Wunschie, which he did while he was doing his PhD at Cornell with Alan Laxo. And so, among other things, Jens was able to point out the fact that there were linear relationships between leaf area, it's expressed here on the x-axis as leaf area index, and yields of apples. So it's a nice, quite tight linear relationship. The R square, fairly strong, is two different varieties. But then Jens was able to break down this general relationship in two leaf families, the leaves belonging to short shoots, less than 5 centimeters long, or whorls of primary spur leaves around the base of the spurs. And the relationship between this leaf area and yield was even tighter. The R square increases. When he tried the same relationship with the rest of the leaves on the extension shoots, the bore shoots longer than 5 centimeters and so on, the relationship just wasn't there. How can we explain this? Well, in the case of the spur canopy, studies like the one I showed before had shown that the spur leaves are the earliest exporters to the fruit, and they support fruit in a very critical phase, fruit set, and subsequent growth by cell division, which is setting the potential for future fruit development. If there's more cells, fruit have the potential to grow larger. Why is there not a relationship within this family of leaves and yield? It's probably because by the time these leaves become capable of exporting toward the fruit, there is an abundance of them that is more than enough to support the demand of carbon for fruit growth, and therefore the relationship just doesn't appear to be there. Now, this was apple, but I'm sure people are familiar with the drawing up here, and the breakdown in label distribution within the branch that Greg and Marlene carried out. I take this out of their cherry book, but this is actually, I believe, out of Marlene's thesis and a number of papers that have come out from that work. But this just supports the concept that leaf demography can be brought around across different species. I could have shown some of my own work, some of my own work on peach, which would reaffirm also for that crop that we can definitely identify different leaf families. So fruit growth then is not so simple when we look at it from this point of view. Now, back in the old days, a lot of interest was put into creating models, complex models depicting the carbon balance of the entire tree, and fruit growth was needed as a component for these models. I'm showing here two examples that have been proposed in the literature, which I think are about the strongest models for fruit growth for apple and pears on the left, and stone fruit, peaches in particular, on the right. But from these models, I would venture out to say that they have provided us with a new paradigm. These models have become perhaps aren't as strongly founded physiologically when they were proposed, but I think they have stood the test of time, and we've learned a lot more about the physiology of growth of these fruits, and it still can be reconciled to these models. But they led us to form a paradigm, at least in my lab, we have been thinking like this for many, many years now, and that is, if we can assess correctly fruit performance in growing, then we could use that as a diagnostic tool. In other words, if a fruit looks like it's growing where we think it should be, then we're probably doing a pretty good job of managing the orchard, the tree that the fruit is hanging from. So on the left here is the expolinear model that Alan and myself and others proposed. And on the right is the model that De Jong from UC Davis and Guderian from Wageningen University in the Netherlands proposed for peaches. And I want to stop here on the one on the right, because this is the foundation of what I'm showing you in the next couple of slides. This model basically shows us the changes over time in fruit growth acceleration. As fruits are very small, they grow very rapidly, and because in relative terms, they grow a lot bigger every day compared to what they were the day before, because they're small, they have a fairly high acceleration rate. As they grow larger, that acceleration rate decreases, and it decreases until the point of pit hardening. When fruit enter the stage of cell expansion, they maintain a small but positive acceleration. Now, this being horizontal means it's constant, and being an acceleration, it's a negative logarithm, which means it's a very small number, but it is a positive number, and it is constant. This has allowed us to formulate a very simple model for forecasting fruit growth, because if we assume that acceleration is constant once the fruit enter the cell expansion phase, if we can estimate that acceleration, which I don't want to expand on how you can do it, but graphically here you can assume the slopes that you see here as that acceleration, you can then simply extrapolate out to an expected date of harvest, that slope, and come up with an estimate of what your fruit size should be. And here you can see the results of guessing, if you want, or trying to forecast with data collected between 37 and 30 days before harvest. It's not bad for field condition, an R-square of 0.5. However, if we shift it to the right a little bit, the time of this forecast, and took the data 27 and 20 days before harvest, 3 weeks before harvest, we could estimate size at harvest, forecast size at harvest, and the accuracy would improve quite a bit. Now, if you think that 20 days before harvest is not a long time to change things in your crop, for peaches, that wouldn't really be true, because peaches can grow 3, 4, 5 grams, sometimes more in fresh weight per day. So 20 days, if you can increase by 25% the growth rate of a fruit that's growing 4 grams per day, you would end up with a fairly larger fruit. So there is merit, and those models have taken us to these things that we're still not applying, but they reinforce the fact that if you can assess growth of your fruit and have forecasting tools, you might be able to change your management according to how it looks like you'll end up at the end of the season. However, when these models came out and were proposed, we really didn't have a strong grasp on the physiological basis underpinning them. I think now we can provide some physiological foundations to that. And one of the reasons we can do that is because we have been able to use over the years tools like the one on the left here. We developed this in my lab 18 years ago, and we've been using ever since. And on the right, you see a novel version of this that we have been developing thanks to the team of engineers that have made it seem like it's ridiculously easy for them to create something that instead took me quite a bit of time to go and find the right sensor, particularly for the type of work that I had in mind. But anyway, with tools like these, over the years, we, as well as other people in other laboratories using a particular type of experiment, have been able to pinpoint the, let's say, physical mechanics of fruit growth. And as you can read up here, there's essentially two different ways that fruit can increase their mass: importing water and carbohydrates through the xylem, through the phloem, and sometimes, not always, losing water through the skin. So these two main mechanisms are called symplasmic and apoplasmic phloem unloading mechanisms. Some fruit grow by a symplasmic mechanism, and notably, many fruit when they're young will grow like this. And so the circles are around young kiwi fruits, young peaches, but also around larger peaches. And I'll focus on peaches because simply a symplasmic way of downloading from the phloem means that in these fruit, a gradient in pressures is maintained from the leaves to the fruit so that phloem flows can enter the fruit passively. That is, without need for any energy consuming mechanisms to push the carbohydrates into the fruit. To achieve this gradient in pressures for these fruit, transpiratory losses of water through the skin are extremely important. And as you can tell from this part of the graph, these fruit can lose quite large amounts of water through the skin, as shown here by this. This is transpiration, and these numbers look like they're small, but it's grams relative to grams of fruit mass per day. So when a fruit is 100 grams, it will be losing it might be losing 40 grams of water, but it would be sucking in through the xylem almost 40 grams of water. Now these are really too large, but basically you can tell that transpiratory losses in these fruit are made up by gains from the xylem and also gains from the phloem. As a result, the fruit will grow. This is the dot here indicates how much it will grow per gram per day. So again, it's not a lot, it's related to a single gram of fruit. So as the fruits are larger, that becomes a larger figure, as we will see. From this, what you can read is quite simple to explain. Transpiratory losses will make that gradient in pressures steeper so that more phloem flow will be allowed to discharge into the fruit, but that flow brings carbohydrates into the fruit. At night, when leaves, or mid-afternoon into the night, when leaf transpiration decreases and ceases, those the gain through the xylem. And so the transpiratory losses will be more than compensated by the new inflows. This gives us a very clear indication that for a crop like peach, it's not a bad idea to do something to boost transpiration of the fruit. And here I'm just showing you results from a study done at the grower's orchard. Mattia Ridolfi, who is a former student of ours, he has a master's with us. And Mattia just remembers some of my lectures on this topic. So a couple of years ago, he called me up and said if I had ideas to suggest for him to try. And I said, why don't you give the increasing transpiration a try? So what he did was he went ahead and bought reflective mulches, the kind that Extendave would be the most commonly known name, but that kind of materials which is manufactured by other companies around the world. And he bought enough to cover half of 1 hectare or about 1 acre or 714 trees. And the second half of the hectare he left untreated, and then he went ahead and we had the fruit gauges on. That's how the orchard looks with the mulches. And despite the fact that the fruit gauges, there were 8 on the trees with the mulches and 8 on the trees without the mulches, but sheer luck hit us again right in the middle of our heads, and a storm came through and shot 7 of the 8 fruit out of the box that was monitoring the mulches. However, for this single fruit, we had many, many days, and we used those as close scrutiny, and I'm not making a big deal, but it does seem to be the case that the mulch, the fruit, were having a larger growth during a typical day. But Mattia picks his fruit and packs his fruit, so we have the breakdown in fruit sizes from the entire 714 trees into 2 halves, and the mulched fruit are shifted 1 size category to the right, that is towards larger fruit, which is a good thing if you're selling your fruit. Of course, these are the prices that he fetched for these fruit, and as you can see, the larger fruit were almost 3 times. He got paid almost 3 times as much as the smallest fruit. So for him to shift to the right up here was a very good idea. It just adds up to these figures here. And that's the net difference. And basically his conclusion was he bought the plastics and they paid for themselves in just 1 year. This is more or less, he said, is about 2,000 to do this trial. Now this will work for a symplasmic downloader. Not all fruit are symplasmic. In fact, we go back to this and now look at the apoplasmic vascular downloaders. And first of all, we noticed that we found aging, if I may say so, kiwi fruits over here in this category. So kiwi fruit shifts from symplasmic to apoplasmic over the season. Notably, we find grapes and apples. As you can tell, there's very little transpiratory losses now, very little inflows through the xylem, whereas phloem keeps chugging along. In many of these crops, all 3 of these crops, the xylem is no longer pervious, we say, or functional. Some authors argue, particularly for grapes, that the xylem is functional but cannot be used to send water into the fruit, and it gets complicated. I'm not sure I could tell you exactly how it is, so I'd better not venture that way. As I pointed out, kiwi fruit is capable of switching from one model to the other, and it's not alone because the same happens to cherries. I'm using some work out of one of the most renowned laboratories that have been looking at this, Moritz Noche in Germany will be the leader of this laboratory. This is one of their recent papers. And up here, they show how xylem inflows, this is stage 2, so early in the season, prior to veraison of the fruit, xylem and transpiratory losses are mirroring each other. That is, the skin of the fruit can lose water during this time, and as fruit lose water via transpiration, that water is replenished from the xylem. The phloem chugs along, not very much going on with the phloem here. But as we go into post-veraison, transpiration, it continues to increase, but then it kind of reduces itself. It's reduced because the skin is probably putting on some surfactants or something that restricts water penetration through the skin. But the xylem really is decreasing its capacity to transport. So here we talk about losing functionality. And at the same time, phloem inflows are increased very much. And because of the falling apart of the relationship between xylem and transpiration, this is an indication that this phloem inflow is an active mechanism. An apoplasmic unloading of the phloem into the fruit parenchyma means that we have some mechanisms that bring carbohydrates from the phloem across the membranes into the fruit. This behavior may have implications on fruit nutrition because calcium is a very important component of fruit quality, but calcium is only xylem mobile, and if these fruits lose xylem functionality as they develop, then it becomes a problem to supply them. And if their surfaces are not as permeable as one might think, then applying carbon may not be as effective. This is strawberry, which has just been very recently published by the same group in Germany. And this dye here disappears as the fruit nears maturity, and this is a xylem-bound dye. So that the fact that it's only appearing up here means that the xylem connections here have stopped functioning, and so there is quite a bit to be studied yet again. The relationships between fruit, leaves, and stems are very complicated during a day and can be shifted in the near future from a day to this much water. In the triple cover, we applied slightly less than 50% of that, so slightly more than 50% of that. And we didn't lose yields for the two varieties that we tested. Yields might give us another example where fruit rate could become a better proxy for the water status of the tree is given by one of our recent papers, where we've shown that monitoring fruit growth with our fruit gauges, which are fairly accurate, allowed us to pinpoint thresholds, like here, of fruit growth rates that corresponded to the onset of mild water stresses. So instead of having to spend the time to go out with a pressure bomb and doing stem water potentials at midday, maybe expanding work like this and implementing a few fruit gauges, perhaps on a wireless Wi-Fi network and so on, that one might see from the cloud, might give us a better potential to drive irrigation more correctly. Coming to sweet cherry, I would like to say a few things about some of our work. So we've looked at water relations and fruit growth in sweet cherries. We've, for example, looked at a comparison between two rootstocks, one that is quite commonly used with us. It's out of my department, actually, many years ago, CAP 6P, comparing it to Gisela 6, which has now found its place in our orchards as a dwarfing rootstock that people find performs well under our conditions. So here on the left, we have what one might expect, seasonal shoot growth. Shoots grow longer, significantly longer, all season long, in favor of CAP 6P. Of course, I say favor, but we really want that much vigor. Fruit growth, instead, is just the same for the two rootstocks. We looked at the relationship, the water relations, and here at two different times in the season, and stem water potentials for 6P and Gisela, and there is a difference. The Gisela shows more negative, i.e. A lower hydraulic conductance, and more work needed for the tree to grow water from the ground, but the leaves are indifferent. For the fruit, well, the Gisela fruit seemed to have to work a little harder. They reached more negative water potentials. It's not so easy to make sense of these data, but if we simply take the distance between this line and this line, and this line and this line, that gives us an easier way to see this thing. Here it is. So these are the gradients between leaves and stem, and as one would expect, the gradient is bigger for the 6P than for the Gisela, and this means water is drawn more strongly to the leaves and the shoots, and that's why they probably grow longer. If we look at the gradient between the fruit and the stem, except for one instance, we really don't find differences between the two rootstocks, which means these fruit have an equal chance to draw water and assimilate from the tree as they do on the 6P. And so this difference here, we think, explains the difference, or helps explain the difference in shoot length, as well as the lack of difference here helps explain the same size that the fruit reached. This shows simply that photosynthesis was not affected, and I don't really have the time to expand on that. Here we look at the vascular flows from that study, and let's look at the right column, which is data for the entire fruit. The left column is just relative. So entire fruit growth for the two rootstocks, there is no difference at 30 days or at 50 days after full bloom. The two rootstocks, the fruit, have the same total growth. What is interesting and confirms what we saw from the paper by Bruggenwirth that we saw before. Early on, 30 days after full bloom, strong transpiratory losses, big inflows from the xylem, and some from the phloem. Later on, the picture is completely reverted, so much bigger growth, but not supported by transpiration, nor so much by xylem as much as by the phloem. Another study compared varieties, one large fruited variety, Vera, and Black Star, which is from our breeding program. And here we also have a mild irrigation stress, mild water stress, withholding 30% of irrigation water. When I say mild, it's not because 30 is a small number, but because cherries grow in the early part of the season for us, which is not one of our driest periods of the year, May and June. However, physiological parameters, no big differences there, but for the large fruited variety, Vera, early on, withholding 30% of irrigation gives us a smaller fruit, but it's not significant, and nothing is really significant. But later on, for the large fruited variety, we do see a significant difference in total growth. Removing 30% of water gives us half the size in terms of growth per day, not the size, sorry, but growth rate. And that decrease is mostly due to the phloem that is being decreased. So probably this reduction in water causes a decrease in photosynthesis and less carbohydrates in favor of the of these fruit. We didn't see differences in photosynthesis, but this would be the part of the season where we're looking at with this chart. Right. So water relations. What kind of sensors do we have? What can we do with these new technologies emerging? This is the fluoropulses developed by Alan Laxo and colleagues up at Cornell. They are inserted in the trunk. We have a bunch of them that we just bought, but we couldn't use this year. So I'm really excited to try them next year, perhaps hopefully in combination with another prototype sensor, which is based on a plant fiber that senses ions moving through the xylem sap, or the sap flows in the shoots. And I hope to use the two of them in combination. This is from one of our National Research Council institutes in Italy. I hope to use them in combination to be able to pinpoint the timing of water uptake and delivery to the leaf fruit. Another thing that is happening is obviously orchard design, and this is our first attempt at the planter cordon apple orchard, fashioned hopefully following Stuart Tustin's Ken Brain and Ben van Hooydonk down in New Zealand. And as you can tell, the spacing between the rows is quite narrow. This is 2 meters, but we have a section of the orchard that's down to 1.5 meter. And the reason for this is because now that we have this kind of orchards, we are also able to bring in engineers that are developing vehicles like this, because we are going to completely do away from fossil fuel consumption in the orchard. So this rover is now capable of leaving the barn, going to the orchard, entering into the rows, and performing management operations like you can see carrying a sprayer in this picture, mowing the grass, or carrying sensors. We want to go fully electric. We know that under our conditions, our very bright summer, long, very bright days, we have damages in photosynthetic apparatus of the leaves because we have too much light. So the idea of this study was to apply photovoltaic plastics to a hail net cover, to remove some of the light and make electricity with it. This didn't prove to be successful, but we are not letting that go easily. So this is another experiment that is just coming to an end, where we couple 3 covers: anti-rain, anti-stink bug, and hail netting, to provide a 50% reduction in light interception in the orchard. As you can tell from here, we not only change the intensity, but also the distribution. We go up nicely up until about 50% of total, and then we stay more or less there until the afternoon. With this reduction, we have all sorts of sensors and weather stations in this orchard. So the local ETO can be calculated from local climatic variables. And last year, which was the first year in the project, we applied in the regular part of the orchard with the regular anti-hail net this much water. In the triple cover, we applied slightly less than 50% of that. So slightly more than 50% of that. And we didn't lose yields for the two varieties that we tested. Yields are tons per hectares. You can judge here. They're very low. Tons per hectares, you can judge here. They're very low. We were frosted out in both years. But what is, for me, important to point out is that even in the crop load was that low, there were differences in fruit size. And we gained in fruit size in both years in the triple cover as compared to the anti-land. So this again is another example of linking the fruit growth physiology to orchard design, because apples are apoplasmic downloaders. They don't need to transpire to grow, and so we can remove light and heat and decrease the temperature, and they will not be affected. A peach wouldn't do that. So here's my conclusions today. I am always very excited about physiology. I think it's a fun thing to work on, and it provides us with a lot of innovation, and will continue to do so, an innovation that can matter in an orchard management environment. I think we're learning more and more that we need to become much better growers, adapting for each crop, not only rootstock distances, pruning systems, but really the understanding of the physiological basis of each crop. It needs to be much stronger than probably it is right now, because there are so many different things between different crops that we shouldn't be thinking anymore that we can manage them all the same. I think, for example, with different crops, irrigation can be shifted in the near future from a daily to an hourly scheduling without any negatives. We are seeing a bigger and broader wave of sensors coming of age, and that's very exciting news. And I think that in the face of climate change, and the need to reduce the use of water and natural resources, orchards still haven't started showing us their potential to really make a difference and to really help us pass the message to society that really horticulture matters to help achieve those climate change goals to try and revert this crazy trend. And with that is my talk. I thank you for your patience, and I will be available for the online live session for questions later on. Thank you.